Do you have a preference, by the way? And not that I can control it fully, but of like people raising their hands as you go, or
I'm going to try to split it into two parts. So maybe.
Do you want to just say that at the beginning?
Yeah. So maybe
instead of
give them a chance to ask some questions in the middle. We'll see how it goes because I think it's too long and I may not get to the second half, but I'm going to try it.
Okay. Great. All right. So we'll get started in a minute. I'm embarrassed to say I accidentally drank out of your cup, so someone is going to get you another cup. But or here it's fine, whatever.
Should I say the other side since I see that's where the stand is?
Okay. That's my notes, don't worry. Alex? The water is coming. I hear that there's more where that came from. Everybody. It's my great privilege to introduce Rabbi Chamber. In every generation, if we're lucky, there are a handful of great thinkers. And in every generation, if we're really lucky, there's a handful of great Jewish communal leaders. Amazingly and incredibly, Rabbi Yitzhak Steinberg has spent a lifetime doing both of those things simultaneously. I could give a whole sort of list of the things Rabbi Steinberg has been involved with over the course of his career, but most of you, hopefully all of you, would rather hear him than me. So I want to just actually share a couple of Roshei Tzafim, a couple of headlines. First of all, and perhaps in a way least obviously, Yitzhak Steinberg has been one of the great pioneers of the American Jewish community's evolving commitment to Jewish adult learning. Carl, for a long time, which Rabbi Greenman founded, was an organization that was totally committed to teaching Jewish adults from an incredible array of backgrounds and commitments, and insisting that they could learn Torah from each other, with each other, and that it was not the case that Torah was the property of some small subsection of the Jewish community, but that it was really Morashat Milat Yaakov, that it belonged to all Jews. In many ways, for that reason alone, the place that you are in tonight might well not exist were it not for Rabbi Greenberg's commitment to adult learning. Tied to that, my story sort of alluded to that, was the insistence that Jews can and must learn from each other, and that is not a b'diavad, that's not something that they have to do because there's no choice, but that's something that they ought to do, and that every Jew has a contribution to the conversation of Torah that is unique and important and ought to be listened to. And that is true about lay people talking to each other, about rabbis talking to each other, about Jews really having a sense of Kal Yisrael in collective pursuit of Torah. Yitzhak Steinberg has also been one of the leading figures in the world of post-Holocaust Jewish theology, and for that matter, in the project of figuring out what Holocaust remembrance should look like both in the Jewish community and in the broader American Jewish community. Most importantly from my own, the ways that I've been influenced by Rabbi Greenberg over the course of my life, is that Yitzhak Greenberg has never tired of articulating a vision of Torah that is at once deeply, deeply rooted in the tradition and at the same time unapologetically open and committed to the modern world. Not traditional but modern, but traditional and modern. That has had manifestations in things like the evolving role of women in Jewish life and in society more generally, and just as importantly, in accentuating and bringing out those voices in the Jewish tradition that are most committed to a humane, universalistic reading of Jewish texts and Jewish theology. The way that I sometimes describe this to people is a description that I think you can say that very few people who you meet in your life, that Rabbi Hitzberger never met a human being he didn't feel he could learn from. And that's on some level, as you're familiar with Pirkei Avot, tremendously high spiritual and human madrigal to reach. So, in many ways, this yeshiva is an attempt, not the only attempt, but an attempt to really live out that joint commitment to the authority of tradition on the one hand, and the unapologetic embrace of the modern world on the other hand. And both indirectly and directly, that's in no small measure due to Witz's teaching and inspiration. So, without further ado, my teacher, Rabbi Yitzchak.
Thank you very much. I hate to interrupt that inspiring speech with my words, but thank you. I presume at least most of the younger people here are here for Hadar, a program which I'm very excited by and very much impressed by, precisely because it tries to explore the richness of the tradition of the text, not only the intellectual but the spiritual and moral richness of the tradition in this environment of complete and open acceptance and learning from the contemporary disciplines of every sort and fashion. Obviously, most of the time you spend here, at least the summer, will be spent on classic texts like Talmud and Midrash and Halacha. So that's not going to be my talk tonight, in part because the truth is that Halacha and Gemara and Midrash and so on are the foundational texts pretty much for about a fraction, I'm not sure what the size of the fraction is, of the 14 million Jews who define themselves, or 13 or 14 million who define themselves as Jews. This same religion is, however, a world religion, meaning that while the rest of the world knows almost nothing about Gemara, Halacha, and so on, much of the rest of the human race, certainly a half of it, has been profoundly shaped by religions that in turn were shaped by the Jewish message. So what I wanted to explore with you is sort of that part of Judaism, that aspect of Judaism. Namely, what is it that has been so seminal and influential in world history? Not that this is in opposition to Gemara or Halacha. I think on the contrary, they are concretized, they are communicated, they are experienced in these texts. But I want to step back and look at the broader framework for a moment. And I'm going to split into two parts. I mean that literally. I hope if I can stay on schedule, which I never have done in my life, but I will try to break this into two parts and to perhaps stop at the end of the first part so you can raise your questions and move on to the second part. How far we'll get in the second part, I don't know. The two parts are simply, one is what's the vision? I think Judaism's vision of the meaning of life, of the world, has been the most influential aspect of the religion worldwide. The second part I'd like to deal is, what's the method of getting there to this inspirational picture that Judaism has? And I must say, I came to this late. For decades after I appreciated the vision, it dawned upon me that the method is probably at least as important as the vision, maybe more important. We're living in one of the great centuries where great visions have turned into monstrous, totalitarian, destructive, anti-human structures and institutions. So it dawned upon me one day that it's not just having a great vision, it's figuring out a method to do that in fact achieves the vision instead of defeating it or destroying it. So I'll start with the vision first, if you'll bear with me. I'm also going to try to show my mincing steps into contemporary life by using some PowerPoint that makes me very avant-garde, at least in the modern Orthodox community. It's like Lubavitch, I use mass media to communicate my slightly older message. Okay, now, so if I had to summarize the vision that has transformed the world, I think it can be summarized in 6 words. It's long enough to stand on one foot, I think. Um, from creation to redemption through covenant. Actually, those are 3 separate stories. The story of creation, the story of redemption, and how to get from creation to redemption, which I would call the story of covenant. And that's what I'd like to explore first. What does it mean? Well, starting with creation. We live in a world which is a rather complex and mixed picture. Serious people, given the histories, a lot of suffering, a lot of evil, a lot of disasters in this world. We've lived through a tsunami in the last year. I mean, there are lots of things going on. Many people think historically pagan ancient times or contemporary serious scientific worldviews. I feel this is a physical reality. It's a random mechanical process that has no purpose, no direction, no values built into it. It is simply a blind process that has yielded this rather remarkable but mixed reality that you and I inhabit. Judaism insists, no, it's a creation. Meaning if you look carefully, and means that you have to develop both a sophisticated insight and a willingness to see the big picture. Despite the tremendous variety, the clashes, the chaos, that if you look closely, you'll see this is a world of order. In fact, of wondrous order, remarkable beauty and unity. If you can see through all the details, you can see through the trees and grasp the forest. It's a creation. Not accidental, but creation means it shows planning, direction, vision, and so on. Secondly, it has a creator. That, of course, is the contribution that most people think of when they think of Judaism, meaning not multiple gods, not multiple forces in conflict with each other. It has one infinite, unseeable, beyond human grasp, and yet one force, person, whatever you want to call it, we call God, that accounts for, not only has created this creation, but sustains it, keeps it going, and keeps it regular, structured, orderly. The most interesting thing about that claim, of course, also is, even though it's so vast, the universe is vast. Now imagine an infinite God greater than the universe. That infinite creator still is deeply involved with creation, cares about it deeply, in fact, loves it, and those who are within creation. The third dimension of the creation story is that, therefore, precisely because it has a creator and it has a pattern, if you will look carefully, it has direction and an outcome. As against a blind mechanical process, this process is going somewhere, it is intended to go somewhere, and before we're done, it will get there. That is the story of creation. Why am I telling you this story? Like all storytellers, at least in theological terms, it's because I'm hoping you'll understand the story, and the Torah tries to tell it as a story, so that you will figure out, well, which character am I, or what are my lines, that you will undertake to find out your character, your lines, and play that part. The second story is actually the third story, but it's the end story of this story. It's really creation realized. The Jewish tradition claims that this world is far from perfect. They don't need to be a genius to know that. Look around you. Evil, suffering, death, sickness, deprivation, poverty. Some of these are natural because there's disasters, and some of these are human inflicted, but it's a world full of a lot of rotten things. Nevertheless, it is intended to be perfect. If you read the story of Breshit, you'll see that God repeatedly says about this world that it is good. In fact, at the end, God rates it as a 10. It's very good. At the very end of creation, although I should say perhaps rates it as a 7, that's the Jewish version of 10. The old 10 is the new 7, or vice versa, the old 7 is the new 10. Be that as it may, that world is intended to be perfect, and here's the rub. It will be perfect. That's what our religion claims. So, If you grow up in a world which is marked by injustice, if you are a serf who is owned by somebody else, if you are a slave, if you are a black person who, in fact, therefore is told that you're inferior, nonsense. All these things that are wrong with the world are a deviation from the ultimate outcome and don't stand for it. You can fight City Hall, or you should fight City Hall. That's the story of redemption. Redemption says that this creation will become perfect, will be made perfect before we're done. So the world of perfect order, perfect harmony, perfect peace, perfect life will be achieved. That's the story. Now, how are we going to get there? It's through Kavod. I'll come back in a moment. Now, let me first go back in a little more detail about this creation story. It starts, of course, well, I'm sorry, that was the first slide. Those are the three main stories of the Jewish religion. Now, when I say tell a story, how would I tell a story in Jewish religion? Help me out here. How would I tell a story? Louder? No, but how would we tell the story in the religion? How does the religion actually tell the story? See, so what's that? Well, as a metaphor, yes, but my point is, the whole religion is nothing more than telling the story in many different ways. For example, next slide, slide after, sorry. Slide of this shows creation through, next, go ahead. Okay, how do we tell the story of creation? Well, of course, studying text, scriptures. Turns out that creation is a story that's told repeatedly. The very first opening of the Jewish Torah, the founding primary document of Jewish religion. The opening chapter is about the first Jew, Abraham? No. The opening chapter gives you the first law of Jewish law code. You should create a new moon or go up Matzah. No, that's the 12th chapter of the second book. And the first Jew is talked about in the 12th chapter of the first book. So what's the first 12 chapters? When does the Torah start with? Creation from the first moment of existence. What's the message? The message is this is not a religion about the Jewish people, or not about them alone. It's about existence, where it's coming from, where it's going, and what it's meant to be like. The story of creation is told not once, but as I said, if you study Psalms, you will see it's repeatedly, Job again, Nehemiah again, Isaiah again. Second way we teach a story, so half the texts you study are about creation, as you will, maybe not. Okay, next, another way, how do we teach in the Jewish religion? Prayers. The opening of the warm-up prayers, the Psukei Zimra, blessed is he who spoke and the world came into being. Blessed is he who created the universe. Blessed is mercy in the world, creatures, etc., the life of the universe. Next slide. When you say the Shema, before you say Shema, you have to say two blessings before and one after. What's the blessing before? Creator of light, shaper of darkness, maker of peace, creator of everything. In his goodness, he renews creation every day. At night, same bracha. Bring on the evenings, open the gates of heaven, change the times. So the prayers, every day, if you pray Jewish tradition, you pray 3 times a day, you'll be saying prayers about creation. Next. Third way we teach, holidays. If you pay attention, annually we celebrate the creation of the world, Rosh Hashanah. Monthly we celebrate creation by celebrating the appearance of the moon again. Weekly, what is Shabbat about? Zechel Ma'aseh Bereshit. So for 24 hours, one of the main things you're doing in Shabbat is reminding yourself and living through the fact this is a created world. It's a creation, not an accident. And Passover, etc. What's the fourth way one teaches in the Jewish religion? So again, much of the time you're spending is telling these stories. Next one. Observances. Every bracha, when you eat, you say, I eat an apple, what's the bracha? You thank God who's borei pri'aitz. Right? You name it. Shakol ne'eh b'varo. All of the world was created by God's word. All the brachot, or most of the brachot, or many of the brachot, I shouldn't say all of them, many of them are trying to draw attention to the story of creation, or maybe to the story of redemption. For example, the bracha that follows Shema every morning. Shema is the kind of the pledge of allegiance of Jewish people. What's the bracha that follows Shema? God Yisrael, the bracha of redemption. At night too. So in short, the religion 100 different ways is trying, if you know, if you're a traditional Jew, you know, it's 1,000 different ways. In fact, they're nudges. They just never let you forget anything. They repeat it and repeat, repeat, repeat. So, but the truth is they're telling you the story creation to redemption through covenant. Okay, so now let's move on. What's the story of creation itself? It turns out there are three fundamental rhythms in creation if you look carefully. What are the three fundamental rhythms? Well, the first is the whole world is a movement from chaos to order. If you look at the story of Bereshit, the world opens up with tohu vavohu. It's total chaos. By the end of the week, God adds, God distinguishes, God makes order. By the end of the week, where are we? What's the last day of the creation? Shabbat. What's Shabbat about? Perfect order. The world is now in perfect order. It has moved from chaos tohu vavohu to Shabbat, to perfect order. That's a rhythm in creation. Now again, why didn't you notice it? Why didn't you notice it? Why didn't you notice it? Sorry? You're too busy. Well, because the answer is because you're like me. Because your day doesn't move from chaos to order. It starts in the morning very orderly. My desk is neat when I arrive, and by the end of the day, we've gone from order to chaos. So your mental image of the world is it's going from order to chaos. But in fact, that's because you're thinking of from a very narrow framework. A 70, 80, how many years will you live creature, a trivial, a little wave on a wave of a little white cap on a wave of a vast. So you never think in these terms, but it's a movement from chaos to order. In fact, you turn to the next slide. What's the scientific picture? Starts with total chaos, creation, right? Big bang, and gradually what it moves. It takes billions of years to atoms, to galaxies, to stars. It took 10 billion years to get to stars. And then the stars into planets. Life is only 2 billion years old, so of course you didn't notice it. During your lifetime, you hardly noticed that. But if you would step back and look at it from God's perspective, from the eternal perspective, you would realize that the world is moving from chaos to order. And that's what you're supposed to be aware of in the story of creation. Now, what's the next great rhythm of creation? Again, the world is moving from non-life to life. How do I know that? Well, in the Genesis story, there's no life the first 2 days. The third day, there's vegetation, which is a kind of life. It's not the full life that the Torah is really all excited about. Day 4, no life. Day 4. Not until the 5th day of the 6 creative days does life show. Life is very late in the game. Why didn't you notice it again? Because the honest answer is, mentally, you don't think in those terms. Look at the next one, the scientific version, right? Cosmic evolution, it took billions of years to get there. You don't think in those terms because in your mind, life is moving from life to non-life, from life to death. I mean, if you were in the life insurance business, you take this very personally, right? It's a whole industry based on the recognition that most people realize they're going to die, so they have to protect themselves or their family financially. But that's your perspective. If you look at it from the divine perspective, from the beginning when there was no life, till 1 billion plus years ago when life showed up, and now we've had this incredible proliferation. There's 10 million species and counting. Amazing proliferation of life. So the world is moving toward life, actually. It's just that you don't notice it because you are thinking inside your own skin and going the other way. So what's the third great rhythm of creation? Life is not just developing quantitatively, but qualitatively. If you look at the amoeba and look at the chain of life, what you see is a growth in power, in consciousness, in capacity for relationships, in freedom, and that's the point. If you look at these qualities, power or consciousness, humans have amazingly more than the previous forms of life, and those forms of life more than before them. What the Bible says is that this development is becoming more and more like God. The hidden power that sustains the world, it's like you're growing, being fed this energy of the divine, And therefore the form of life that emerges as time goes on becomes more and more godlike. Next slide. Well, again, I won't go through this same idea, the development of life itself. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, the climax of this process. Now, this process is going on for billions of years, but the climax of this process, or I should say so far, because young, and who knows, a billion years from now, I'll look at pictures of us and they'll say, my God, like the dinosaurs, look how poorly shaped they were for the world that they then poisoned and created so much heat they couldn't live. Hey, whatever they'll say. Anyway, to go back at this, the image of God, the highest form of life so far becomes so developed, so godlike, that the Torah says this isn't the image of God. What does it mean that you are in the image of God? It means, look at the Tehillim, you have made him a little less than divine. We are not divine. It's one of our problems, so we get confused. Humans are like God, but they're not God. One of the big problems of human history is that humans are so much like God that they start to think they are God, and then they act like God, and then they become the devil. But I say like God, let me give you an example for me, because it happened in my lifetime. Probably most of you are too young to have gone through it, but you know the results. In my lifetime, two scientists named Crick and Watson decoded DNA. What's DNA? DNA is the code of life. All living creatures, all cells, right? Now again, you have to understand what accomplishment this is. They decoded it. On the other hand, if you think about it, they didn't invent it. That would be godlike. That would be God. But decoding it, not bad. I would say reasonable to say godlike, and so on. In the last 100 years, people have discovered the enormous amounts of power and energy that are in the smallest amount of matter that can be converted into energy, and so on. I mean, there are some amazing godlike human accomplishments. That's what the Torah. Now, so we are images of God. I'll come back to this quality in a moment, but I want to move on to the important point. What is the value? What is the dignity? What's the meaning of life that has become so godlike? So the Gemara in Sanhedrin 37a tries to quantify, if you will, or at least concretize, what are the dignities that life is entitled to. Now, all life is entitled to dignity, but the more the life, the more developed, the more dignity it's entitled to. And here's how the Talmud tries to define the human being in the image of God. For this reason, one individual being was created. This is the story of Adam, of course. What does the Torah teach us this? Anyone who destroys a single soul, we left out a phrase here. Anyone who destroys a single soul, Scripture considers him as though he has destroyed the whole world. Anyone who preserves, we're missing a sentence there, anyone who preserves a soul, it's as if he's preserved the whole world. So what's the first dignity of an image of God? Saving one is like saving a whole world. Killing one is like killing a whole world. How would we articulate this dignity? So what I submit is very simple. There is one, there are actually two, but I'm going to take one mathematical term where 1 times that term is the same as 6 billion times that term. There are 6 billion people, roughly 7 billion maybe in this world. What's that term? The negative 1 is 0. What's the positive term? Infinity. So I think what the Mishnah is trying to say is that every human being, as an image of God, has infinite value. That's why 1 times infinity is like saving 6 billion times infinity. What does it mean to say I'm treating human being as infinite value? Want to try the next slide? Well, I just throw this out. These are images of man, not images of God. These are the top 10 paintings with world record prices. You get the point? The most expensive work by Jackson Pollock, no less, $140 million. Okay? So, what's my point? If a Klimt is worth $135 million, how much is a painting by God worth? How much is an image created by God worth? What's the answer? Infinitely more. Now again, that may sound like a clever idea until you stop and ask, how do they treat the Pollock or the Klimt? I don't know, frankly, because they were privately owned. But this one was sold to a Japanese insurance company, so they had to, as a stockholder company, they had to put on record what they're doing with the painting. You know what they did with it? You can guess. What did they do with it? What's that? Well, they wouldn't put it in bank if they want to show it off. They own it. But what did they do? They created a special vault for it. People could come in. And what was the vault like? You know what the answer is? It can't be too hot, because if it gets too hot, it can melt paint. It can't be too cold, because it could crack. It can't be too wet, because moisture undermines color. It can't be too dry, because the canvas will split. So you have to have a perfect setting where it will be protected in all its value and beauty, right? Now, why am I telling you this story? Because that sold for a mere $82.5 million. Now, what does that imply about the kind of human shelter one should have? Next time you go on a winter night down New York City, on a Bowery, wherever you go, and you see a homeless person lying there freezing, and cars are driving by and splashing with mud, what do you know? They're not treating this human being like an image of God. There's something wrong with this world. And as long as people are not treated like infinitely valuable, this world needs correction. But we understand now what our goal is. Right? If you're poor, you can't afford medicine, you can't afford insurance, that's an issue, right? Health insurance, well, the answer is, if you don't have enough money, you won't have a doctor, and you will get sick and you will die. So the answer again is, if that happens, this world is not treating you like an image of God. That's the first dignity. Let's go back now. Go back. Okay, the second dignity of an image of God is, one might not say to his fellow, my ancestor was greater than yours. What's the second quality of an image of God? Dignity, that if you're an image of God, you're entitled to? I'm sorry? What was that? No, just the opposite. No one can say my ancestor was greater than yours. We're saying is equality. Well, again, think about it. If I'm infinitely valuable, how can he be worth more than me? So it's not true that men are worth more than women. It's not true that whites are worth more than blacks. It's not true that, you name it. Of course, it is true, but that's, again, the measure of what has to be changed in this world till we get there. What's the third dignity of every image of God? A man strikes many coins, they all resemble one another, but the Supreme King of Kings, the Holy One, the Blessed, stamped every human being in the stamp of the first human being. Now one of them is like another. What's that imply? Sorry? A little louder? Individuality, or the way I would like to put it? Each one is unique. Each one is unique. That's how you know you're seeing an image of God. When someone says to you, in the dark, all women look alike. Or when someone says to you, in the dark, all African Americans look like muggers. What are they really saying? Or for that matter, if they say all Jews are smart, or all African Americans have rhythm, what are they really saying? What's that? They're saying they're all alike. It's a denial of the image of God. They're really trying to say, this is not an image of God. In the case of the woman in the dark, the answer is it's a sex object. Doesn't matter what it looks like, really. But that's, of course, the denial of the dignity of the image of God. So the Jewish tradition believes that in the world that we live in, every human being is entitled to the dignity of infinite value. Again, I would quantify that. How much money do you have to spend to show that you really mean it? How much money would you save to save my life? How much money would you spend to make me healthy? How much money do your parents spend for your tuition in university? What are they saying when they do that? That's a real statement. You know what? I treasure you so much that I would spend tens of thousands of dollars to improve the quality of your life. That's a statement. What's the reverse? What's the reverse statement? In Africa, I'm sure you saw the statistics, there was a big drive to raise money against malaria. Why? It turned out millions of African children die every year from malaria. They could be saved if we could get malaria mosquito, anti-malaria mosquito netting. It's just netting with a little infusion of anti-mosquito pesticides, right? What do those things cost? The answer is $8 for one that would last for 5 years. It comes out to, what, $1.60 a year. It's less than half a penny a night. But in fact, millions of those children, no one is willing to spend or has the half a penny to keep them alive. So there's a measure of how far the world is from what it's meant to be, but that's the Jewish position. That before we're done, every human being will be treated like they're infinitely valuable, equal, and unique. Okay? Forward. Forward. Okay, those are the three dignities. Thank you. Okay, next. Okay, skip. Next. Okay. Now I bring you to the story of redemption. Story of redemption is very simple. What's the story of redemption? Geulah in Hebrew. The answer is, this world as it is will not stand. We're going to perfect it till we respect the dignities of image. Till we create a society, not just a natural order, but a human order which respects the dignity of uniqueness or of equality or of infinite value. So again, what am I talking about? When will this great moment arrive in according to Jewish tradition in history, when will it arrive? In the Messianic age. That's what the Messianic age is all about. If you look at the prophets, what kind of a world would it have to be if it truly respected the infinite value, the equality, the uniqueness of every person? You know what the answer is? Poverty. Is poverty consistent with the infinite value of human beings? No. When people are poor, they can't afford mosquito net. When they're poor, they can't afford the doctor. When they're poor, so poverty, this world will have to be a lot richer, not just distributing wealth, but creating wealth so there's enough so that everybody would have what they need to be treated with the full dignity. We'd have to overcome hunger. Hunger is not compatible with dignity. I shouldn't be starving if I'm worth something. In fact, starving will destroy me. I'd have to overcome oppression. Is sexism compatible with the image of God? Not really. It's a denial of the dignity, of the equality of women. Is racism? Not really. Is anti-Semitism? Not really. So we'd have to create a world in which we overcome all those unjustified and abusive hierarchical relationships and establish a world of true equality. A world, in fact, where the rich will get no better justice than the poor. Take that, O.J. Simpson, as he shall judge the poor with equity and decide with justice for the lonely of the land. That's what Isaiah. Now again, you know, we all know, forget about O.J. Simpson, how about the companies that get away with all kinds of abuses because they have bottomless legal access, or they can afford to pay a fine and walk away. The point is, in the Messianic age, there will be true equality, there will be justice, equal justice for all. War. Is war compatible with the image of God dignity? How do you win a war? You have to wipe out infinitely valued, unique lives. If you kill enough, you win. So the truth is we're going to have to abolish war. And that's what Isaiah predicted. Remember, you heard it here first. They will beat their swords into plowshares, and they will learn war no more. Before we're done, people will live in peace with each other. We will have overcome war. What other? This is all going to be in the Messianic age, but of course we have to get there. We'll get there in a moment. Next slide. What else will we have to overcome? Well, how about sickness? Anybody here ever deal with someone in the family who has Alzheimer's? What's the problem of Alzheimer's? Loss of memory. And what happens when they lose their memory? They lose their uniqueness. They lose their capacity to be themselves, to understand who they are, their memories, their connections, their relationships. So the truth is that Alzheimer's is a violation of dignity as an image of God. We'll have to learn how to cure it. Isaiah predicts all the sicknesses will be cured. The blind will be, eyes of the blind will be opened, the deaf shall be unstopped, the lame shall leap like a deer. Stroke. What happens to a stroke? It robs me of so many of the qualities of my capacity and my dignity. So part of the task of the Messianic age, how to get there, is to learn how to cure sickness. But again, we're predicting that we will learn. Well, of course, I should probably quit here because I'm pushing your credibility or my credibility with you. But of course, Jewish religion is incredible. Next. course, the ultimate dream of the Jewish tradition is we'll overcome death. In the Messianic age, we'll overcome death. In fact, I'm going to throw this away because I don't have time to defend this, although I'm a strong believer in it. We'll do better than overcome death in the Messianic age. What are we going to do to really overcome? Because death, you say, well, we'll learn how to cure cancer, we'll cure all diseases, we won't have death anymore. We'll learn how to develop better genetic ways of fighting growing old. You know, it turns out now as you go old, they snip off pieces of the chromosome. We're going to learn how to add pieces of the chromosome, so they'll live. Okay, we'll figure that out. The ultimate dream of the Messianic age is, next slide. That's what I say. How I bow my head, I love it. The Jewish tradition predicts not only will we cure death, but in retrospect, everybody ever died should have lived. Loving God, infinitely valuable. You ever lost somebody you loved, somebody you really care deeply about, you'll realize. It's absolutely heartbreaking, and there's absolutely no replacement. No replacement. You have another child, not going to solve the problem. So the ultimate overcoming of death would be resurrection. Not immortality. The soul lives on, but the body would be reborn and created. Now again, whether you agree or not, or believe it or not, at the point. The story of redemption, quite simply, is what I've tried to sketch here. Next slide. In effect, Judaism is about how you go about perfecting this world. And here's the definition of a perfect world. It'll be full of life, especially life in the image of God, human, in a world structured to fully respect and sustain the dignities of life, both human and non-human, because not just humans entitled to dignity, so are animals. One of the thrusts behind kashrut is that you really shouldn't kill any animal. You should really be a vegetarian. I'll come back to that, but we have time. But in any event, so the ideal of the Jewish tradition is to build and make this world into that world. So I stop here. Of course, it's that vision that has been so revolutionary. Again, it was mediated by Christianity in a somewhat spiritual direction, mediated Islam in a second way, and by modern life in the third way. The modern life was, yeah, we can overcome poverty, hunger, sickness. Let's go. Let's do this together. We're all equal. Throw out the scoundrels, throw out the kings, throw out the dictators, and let's make democracy. And So it's been mediated in different ways, but this vision has been the one that has transformed the world. You were very patient. You had your hand up there.
Oh, yeah. Kind of, I thought it was something that people talk about. Kind of two scenarios. If everybody is valuable, let's say the hypothetical situation that to a bridge or something, and I can take one, and then people like one person having to, and then the other similar person. Let's say there's two people, and one is going to be the next Christian blessing, and that will allow us to probably to make everyone interpret the idea of the perfect world.
Right.
And I have to take names, but we're both so
It's a great question, and of course, what you've dramatized with the question is that we're not living in a perfect world. And this world is making choices. And even if you want to get to the perfect world, what do you do in the meantime? They're hanging the bridge right now. I'm not going to wait till Messiah comes to solve this problem. So the answer is, I would like to deal with that a little more in the second half of this presentation, and I'll ask how we're going to get there. But on one foot, that is exactly what halakha, I think, and Kavan's about, is not only how you work toward that perfect world, but how in the moment right now, when given the limitations of the world as it is, how you make moral choices. So I'll come back to that very shortly. Yeah.
If we set the Torah as God's word, how do we reconcile God telling us the Torah means? How do we reconcile God, or maybe it's just our interpretation of women as beneath men in so many ways? If this is God's word, if this is his plan, his infinite plan.
That's a very good point. Very good point. And of course, again, there's no easy answer. The obvious answer is, obviously what I have done is given you a reading of the tradition that sounds very nice, but it's obviously playing down or not dealing with a lot of flip side questions like the one you mentioned. How about on one foot, again, it comes back to covenant. I think the Torah, it's the challenge of how do you go from an imperfect world to a perfect world. And on one foot, the answer is you start where you are and you move. In principle, that's why I started with that. In the story of creation, man and woman. It said so. I won't go back to that slide now for a moment. It said God created human being in God's image. In the image of God created him, man and woman, male and female, he created them. They're both image of God. But in the real world, when the Torah, let's assume Sinai is in 1250 because that's the most widely accepted date for the Exodus. In the year 1250, what was the condition of women in the real world? Well, the answer is they were chattels. They were bought and sold. So the Torah starts in the real world and tries to move from there. What does that mean? It means literally. If you look at chapter 21, that's the chapter after the Ten Commandments. Chapter 21, I think it's verse 5. It says, if a man sells his daughter, he can only sell it to somebody who will marry her. And when he marries her, she gets the rights of a free woman, which is food, clothing, shelter, and sexual satisfaction. So again, that's not exactly image of God in my terminology, but yes, it's the first step from chattel to complete equality. The problem with this approach, and I stand behind it, I think slavery is the same issue. Torah recognizes slavery, and again, but the answer is, I think, there are two ways of going about abolishing slavery. One of the other ways that was tried was American Civil War. Slavery was abolished overnight by the Emancipation Proclamation. What's the catch? Because you try to make that overnight change when people weren't ready for it. First of all, the Civil War started because they thought you were coming to change slavery. And then, after you changed it, and after they were beaten in war, they were so angry and so unreconciled that they created Jim Crow that kept African Americans down for another 100 years with all forms of discrimination and oppression and structure. So the alternative sometimes is slow, but at least hopefully it gets there. That's my general position. Now, there's one further danger in my position, which of course is, and we're struggling with that. Obviously, if you take the tradition seriously, one of the ways you take it seriously is say, well, this is the word of God in the Torah. So we can't change that. We're only human. So some of the very inequities or injustices, which I would argue are concessions to civilization and to the reality, are in fact turned by others into, this is the word of God, it's eternal. My position is it is eternal. You can keep studying it and learning from it even when it's no longer practicable. Right? For example, again, slavery, how you go about abolishing it. I learned that from the Torah's approach, which started by abolishing slavery. How? Only for Hebrew, not for general, and by putting a limit of 6 years and saying during the 6 years, you're a free man every Shabbat, one step at a time. And if you look at the Talmud, it goes further until step by step it was gradually abolished. In the meantime, we have this other problem of those who insist that you can't change it. And of course, that's again, is one of Hadar's very important points. The texts are there to be studied, to be learned from, and to be interpreted, and to show, in fact, this process of correction, which I think is what God would want. But that's another story. Yes? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Try it again. About homosexuality? Okay. Yeah, okay, well, I always say that those who insist that the Torah is unchangeable in this matter, I'm not sure this is a compliment or not. At least they acknowledge that they're not about to suggest we kill. So, despite the denial of change, there is some recognition or some guilty conscience. My answer would be obviously, I assume that homosexuality was seen either because historically it was a promiscuous way. Of course, the homosexual answer is yeah, because you mistreated us. But it was in many ways defined. There's still a whole group, an important group within the contemporary homosexual community that insists that homosexuality is correct. It is promiscuous, that's the way sex should be, and this attempt to get gay marriage is foisting straight values onto gays. I assume because of the promiscuous history and partly because it was not open to creation of life, which obviously now, again, they're working on that, was opposed very strongly. Third possibility is, of course, Rambam's argument that most of these prohibitions are not just about sexuality, they're about idolatry and idolatrous practices that the Torah opposes. I'd like to think that those are the reasons, and it doesn't change the responsibility to deal with them again, now that we know the reality of meeting homosexuals who are in fact the image of God, and their value, their equality, their uniqueness demands a certain respect right there, and who are further arguing that they are capable of practicing a sexual way of life that meets the standards that I believe the Torah stands for and wants, which is a standard of sexuality as the expression of love and of respect for an image of God of the other, and of discovery. And they believe they can meet those standards, and I think one has to take that seriously. I'll take the last question. You wanted to make a comment?
Actually, just something I think would be interesting to talk about a little bit. So the students in yeshiva spend, no matter what program they're in, time in a senior citizens residence. So many of the residents have dementia, Alzheimer's.
Dementia, right?
I think it's in a place like that where you actually begin to question whether the culture's excessive discourse about prolonging life is actually a move towards dignity, or actually has really profound undersides in forcing people to live in prolonged periods in rather degraded ways. And in a way, that's in a piece with a lot of 20th century philosophy, which sort of moves towards the embrace of finitude, the embrace of mortality, the embrace of human limitation. So I'm wondering how the theology world, sort of throwing out your Torah, responds to the notion that actually a certain level of spiritual maturity is actually about accepting, no, I will die.
Right. It's a very important question. This will be a trigger to me to move on to the second half. Not to dodge your question, I'll make a quick comment about that, but because I think the question of limits is very much at the story of covenants. I want to deal with covenant. On one foot, this approach is dangerous because, like many great things of modern life, they go out of control. In other words, the affluence, I think, is one of the great blessings of all time. Billions of people have been taken from poverty to a dignity that only money and access to physical better conditions and good shelter and good food has made them. So from my point of view, I feel affluence is a great blessing. I affirm it as a religious, powerful force. But we all know that the same talent, energy, thinking that generates affluence also tends to generate, greed and materialism and consumerism, and to the point of sickness, including literally sickness, where people end up then, with the kind of postmodern diets that have become obesity and diabetes and so many diseases of excessive and expensive foods. So that's the problem with modernity in general. I mean, industrial revolution, a great source of human dignity, out of control, global warming, polluting the atmosphere, wiping out whole species. So the trick is the question of limits. I personally think that, I'll come back to limits when I talk about covenant, I would like to push this thing first, because I do think the goal is life, extended life. When I turn a little more responsible, a little more small c conservative, I sometimes stop and say, okay, instead of living forever, how about Isaiah in chapter 66? I quoted, of course, chapter 25, he says, overcome death. In 66, he says, well, no, when he dies at 100 years old, they'll say he was just a kid. So he's willing to admit that he died, but we've just extended life considerably. It could be that's a slightly more realistic approach. Now, of course, the critical question you're asking is, but having cured and letting people live longer, we get all these illnesses of old age, dementia, in general, even before we get to dementia, old age, limited capacity to take care of yourself, limited capacity to whatever, and these things become very debilitating, very hard to take psychologically too. Having said that, of course, my answer to that is we probably will involve some acceptance of limits, and I will come to that, but in the short run, what I'm saying is I think the answer to that in part is it is potentially possible at least, and we've already seen that, to extend life in a much more healthy way before we get to those bad years. In other words, the fact is, people live now between 50 and 70 with a vigor, or 80 with a vigor that most people never lived to get to, let alone when they lived in those years, they had much less vigor. So my answer is, I think it is culturally potential, not to extend life meaningfully, I mean physically and mentally, but also perhaps to deal with cutting off or reducing the kinds of illnesses that now characterize old age. At least I'd like to explore that a little more. Having said that, I acknowledge that many times I get very nervous when people start talking about eternal life for that very reason. I feel there is a kind of an element of out of control there that can become very deadly and very dangerous, and I can see a lot of abuse as potential too. Let's face it, one of the few consolations of history has been that terrible dictators, terrible tyrants, at least they died sooner or later. You knew you were going to get rid of them sooner or later. If we could overcome death, were we stuck with Hitler forever or stuck with whatever? It's a very real concern. Let me get to the second half and come back to the limits question. Okay, next slide. Oh, next. Sorry. Go ahead. Go up to 30 something, I think it is. Keep going. Okay, covenant. Thank you. There we go. How are we going to get there is the critical question. I've already given one of the problems. Historically, those who say we'll make the world perfect, particularly in the last 200 years, it takes a tremendous force. It is a tremendous gripping power to say, I can make the world perfect. And if I say it, I'm a nut. But if I can say it in a credible way and you believe me, people are capable of doing some pretty remarkable things. I'll give you the worst example I can think of. Otto Ollendorf, who was one of the heads of one of the shootings, the Einsatzgruppen that shot to death 1.5 million Jews, most of them women and children, in 1941 and 42, was put on trial after the war. I mention him because there were 25 put on trial. He was the only one who admitted what he did and who honestly, testified about he knew what he was doing and he knew what they did. Otto Ollendorf was his name. The most chilling thing about his testimony, the prosecutor sort of stops and asks him, said, how could you do it? Didn't you see, you saw a picture, Yad Vashem, the mother's holding the baby and the soldier has the rifle about to shoot him. Didn't you see they were mothers? Didn't you see they were babies? How could you bring yourself to shoot these people day after day? And he said, it's the only one. The others were liars, they said. I wasn't there, I didn't do it. I mean, cowards on top of their total murderers. He said, I want to tell you, it was very hard. He said, I'll tell you how I did it. He said, because I said to myself, the Fuhrer has explained to us, we have this chance to make the world perfect. It's National Socialism. We're going to have equality and everybody's dignity, and national, not like the communists who say that labor will fight capital. We're going to have one nation united in a true community, equality. We can make the world perfect with the superior race, everybody now achieving full flowering. The last obstacle is the Jews. And we have to wipe them. He said, I had to make myself hard. I understood. I have to kill this mother and this child because otherwise we won't get there. That's what gave him the strength to keep shooting. That's my point. How could Mao Zedong kill 40 million rich peasants? How could Stalin kill? Because he infected a whole society with this vision, we can make the world perfect. We just got to get rid of the old regime first. We've got to get rid of the rich first, and then we will have a perfect world. So this kind of oceanic utopianism is capable of inspiring great acts of goodness. It's also capable of giving people the emotional strength to do the most cruel, awful, terrible things because they're so inspired by this vision of a perfect world that they block out the screams of the babies or the tears of the mothers. So that's the danger. How do you get there? So the Jewish answer is, number one, you're not going to get there by miracles. That's one of the great temptations of religion. It's such an incredible gap between this moment and the perfect world. God will have to do it for us. The Jews, for 2,000 years in exile, they convinced themselves they'll never get the strength, the military, the political ability to go back to Israel. God will have to send a Messiah, a miracle. God will do it. So when Zionism came, the bulk of them said, well, you can't do that. That's wrong. It'd be impious. You have to wait for God to do it for us. Be impossible and impious. You can't do that. So the covenant says, no, it's not going to happen by God bestowing in a miracle. Secondly, it's not going to happen by escaping to a better world. Yes, in the world to come, we'll all have no more innocent suffering. We'll all have the reward we deserve. But that's not what covenant's about. Covenant's about this world. And the third way covenant says it's not going to happen is exactly what we lived through in the last 20 years. Humans are not going to take charge, get rid of God. I mean, that was one of the great dynamics of modern culture. Marx, religion is the opium of the masses. Get rid of religion, and we can finally liberate all of humanity. Freud, religion is crippling. It's the superego that takes the pleasure, that represses, that destroys people's self-dignity. Get rid of God, and we can get rid of all those superegos, and we can now create a self-expressive, healthily structured, balanced ego and superego, and we can have a free and fully functioning humanity. What covenant says is exactly what happened. It'll happen not by humans taking full charge, because you know what happens when humans take full charge and they say, I'm God, we don't need God, or God doesn't exist? As I said before, they become God, and to become God, they're not God, so they have to make themselves God by killing everybody else who stands in their way. So how will it happen? Next slide. It happens by covenant. And here's what covenant's about. The tradition says it's a partnership of God and humanity. That's the only way the world. God's not going to do it for us. There is a God. God holds us accountable. There's a God who helps us, who points the way, who sustains us. But God will not do it. Humans must participate in their own liberation. Humans have to participate in building a better world. Because you know what? If you took a child and you raised them and you gave them everything they needed and everything they wanted in a perfect world, what would they be when you got through? A dependent, spoiled brat, probably. Incapable of doing anything. So humans have to participate in this process. It's a partnership. Now, how does it work? Jewish claim. This infinite divine source moves toward humans to self-limit. First of all, there wouldn't be a creation. God is so infinite, God fills everything. The very fact that creation is a sign of God's self-limit. But life is all about limits. This unlimited God, what happens if you come in direct contact with the unlimited God? You would die. The finite cannot sustain the infinite. So God has to self-limit. That's what covenant is about. Not only physically to make room for creation, self-limit means that God says, I'm not going to control your life, everything you do. If you listen to God, you get a reward. If you disobey God, you get punished on the spot. If you listen, you get rain. If you don't listen, you get drought. Because it's right there in Deuteronomy. You can ask me that in the question. But what covenant says is that God set up a natural order. The natural order, bodies fall because of gravity. The natural order, so you know what? Natural order. That's the way the world functions. God lets it function that way. It does not step in every time you do the right thing to make sure that if you're the right guy, you shouldn't be hit by that tsunami wave. But if you're a bad guy, it will send a tsunami wave to get you. That's not the way it works. It's a world of natural order. That natural order is a sign of God's self-limit. I'm talking about the first covenant after the flood. You may recall the flood story. What's the flood story? Humans are so bad, God says, wipe them out. Why? Because God's a perfectionist. God wants a perfect world. So fed up with human misbehavior, wipe them out. Then God discovers God's limits. If you're a perfectionist and you want to work with people, what's the outcome going to be? You're going to have to kill everybody because no one's perfect. So you want to be perfect? You say, be perfect or else. You're going to have to kill them and start over again, which is, of course, God's fantasy. I'll start over again, and this time it'll do it right. According to Torah, God realizes that's wrong. The next step of divine self-limitation, natural law, no more floods, no more coercion. Control myself. Make room for you to freely behave. That means I have to accept you as you are, with all your flaws. Maimonides suggests many of the laws are given to self-same limit idea, not what God wants ideally, but what you can handle at this moment. So, for example, Maimonides says that's what sacrifice is about. Not the highest form of service God, but in a world where everybody believes the sacrifice is the only way to connect to God. So the Torah says, okay, I'll give you some sacrifices, but you can't sacrifice your kid. You can't misuse it. You can't think the sacrifices will buy off God and let you get away with immorality under those circumstances. So Maimonides suggests all revelation is a form of covenant. It's God self-limiting revelation so that it's arrived in human terms where humans are at, where they can possibly function. So the first step is God's self-limit. What's the second step? The shift from perfection to acceptance. Before the flood, God says, because men are wicked, he regretted made man, and of course he brings a flood. After the flood, what does God say? Never again will I doom the earth, since the devising of man's mind are evil from his youth. So notice, here he was evil, that's why he wiped them out. Now he's saying no more wipeouts because they're evil. What is he saying? What's he saying?
It's a bad plan.
If you want perfectionism, you're going to destroy people. But if you want perfection and are willing to work with people as they are and go from there, then you accept the fact, they have real limitations. They have weaknesses. They have evil behaviors. Start right there. It doesn't mean you accept evil behaviors. It means you accept them and you try to improve. You try to build from where they are. That's the key to covenant, God's acceptance of human. Now, what does it show, that acceptance? The shift from perfectionism to perfection as a method. As a parent, anybody here been a parent? What does that show? What's the shift? What's that? Anybody here ever get married or think you get married? How do you know you're ready for a covenant of marriage? What's the answer? You shift from perfectionism. You realize, I'm not going to get the perfect. You fill in good-looking, intelligent, famous, rich, kind, whatever it is, what I expected. You're not going to get that. You're willing to accept this person with all their flaws as they are. That's the key. Of course, okay. Anyway, when I was a rabbi, I used to counsel these couples. They come in. I always say, "Well, tell me, what do you like about this brother? What are you looking for?" They say, "She's wonderful. She's perfect." I said, "Go home. You're not married. This is going to break up the first week. You can discover that she doesn't cap the toothpaste, and it's messing up. And you love a perfectly neat sink, so you're going to go crazy right there." I mean, you know what I mean. In other words, that's the move of true love. When you suddenly realize it's not about me. They should be perfect the way I want them to be. Yes, I'm looking for a certain quality, for a certain caliber, but I accept the fact that it's this person as they are, good and bad, and hopefully the good in a way that really connects to my goodness and together. So that's the move of covenant. Next. So the natural law is a statement of self-control. Keep going. Now here's the covenantal move. So if we accept the real world, but we haven't given up our dream of a perfect world. So how are we going to get from the real world to the perfect world? From the world where women are bought and sold to the world where women are fully equal, fully dignified. What are we going to do? So the covenantal point is very simple. I think it's the halakha is about. At this moment when you eat, there's no action of life, by the way, that's neutral here. At this moment when you talk, at this moment when you relate, at this moment when you go to business, look at the real world where you're starting. Look at the ideal. How can you shape the next act you do to in some way move the world from where it is to where it should be? I'll give you the example from the Noah's covenant, but of course it applies much beyond that. Next slide, sorry. Ideal and real. The ideal in Genesis 1 in the Garden of Eden, I give you every seed-bearing plant upon the earth, it shall be yours for food. According to the ideal, not just humans, all the animals, all the birds, everything that creeps, they should all be vegetarians. In the Garden of Eden, they were all vegetarians. Why vegetarians? It's obvious why. Why vegetarians? Respect for life. If you kill something to eat it, you're obviously somewhat lacking in full respect for its life. So in a perfect world, now what's the alternative? We're not living in a perfect world. What's the alternative? We could insist on vegetarians, or we could say what? People lack proteins, or if they don't hunt and catch this animal, they're going to go and take a gun and steal the grain from the neighbor, or whatever the reason. So we're going to make a compromise. What's the compromise? Every creature shall be yours to eat. We're going to allow humans to eat meat. So what's the covenantal act? I don't eat anything I feel like. I deliberately restrict my eating in some small way to show reverence for life. That's the covenantal move. It's not the ideal, it's the ideal possible under the circumstances. Okay? Now, what's the danger of such a compromise? What's that? You're selling out, you're compromising. Some people will think it's the ideal, even worse. So what do you have to deal with? There is going to be some cheapening of life if you're going to allow meat. So what do? Next step. The answer is we're going to reassert the ideal. We're going to put a restriction on your eating of meat. You must not eat flesh with its lifeblood in it. Everybody, not just Jews, by the way. You're not allowed to eat blood. Why not blood? Next slide. Because the blood is its life. You shall not partake of the blood for the life of all flesh. But it's a symbol of the fact that I, by right, shouldn't be eating life. So even though I am killing and eating meat, by giving up the blood, I'm acknowledging that this is not the ideal. This is a compromise. I'm acknowledging that I'm not the master of that life. God is the master of that life. And by implication, I acknowledge that someday I should move on to the higher level. So, by the way, this is not just for Jews. One of the things that always angered me about the blood libel is this a religion that not only doesn't let Jews eat blood, it doesn't let Gentiles eat blood. But you project your worst on somebody else. Now, move on for a second. Further danger. Once you permit, even with the restriction, the danger is there's some weakening of respect for life. So what immediately follows in the covenant is a warning. If you kill human beings, you'll be held responsible. It's fascinating. What's the connection of killing human beings to allowing you to eat meat? But the answer is obvious. Whether you mean it or not, all life evokes a certain reverence. And if you weaken reverence for a lower form of life, the next thing you know is that it will weaken reverence for a higher form of life. So if you play it right, you're going to have to build in extra protections for the side effects. That, in essence, is the covenantal move. One more step, one more line, and then, of course, we go back to the ideal. The ideal remains the covenant of life. We want to increase life in the world. So, summarize the covenantal move, and apply it in the obvious way. I'm about to eat. I could eat anything. But the Torah then tells me, no, shape that eating behavior to recognize the ideal of respect for life. So, you might be a vegetarian. But if not, what do you do next? So again, kashrut is, of course, a more extreme version of this covenantal idea, which starts with all humans, not just Jews. Kashrut says, ideally, all vegetables and all minerals are kosher because there's no killing of life in them. Now, you want to eat life? The lowest form of life you eat is fish. Fish, we add restrictions. What's the restrictions of fish? Well, it really means species. We limit the species. Okay? Next form of life up is birds. What are the restrictions there? We add extra restrictions, a higher form of life. You can't eat all species, limited species, and we add another restriction. You know what the restriction is? How do you kill the bird? The point of shechita being you cut the throat, it bleeds, cuts off blood to the brain, and therefore no pain. You want to eat a higher form of life? Animals? We're going to restrict the species. We're going to restrict how you slaughter it. And finally, no preparation of meat and milk together. Why not? You can see the obvious message. What's the message? Why are meat and milk opposites? They should never be mixed together. Because milk is life, nurturing life, and meat is death. So the twain never shall meet, or at least. So again, every step of kashrut becomes another statement of awareness. And now that's in a ritual, but let me express it in a human context. Speech. You come to me, I have to speak to you back. We're establishing a relationship, right? You ask my opinion. How do I answer you? And I can speak with you with reverence, with respect for your equality, or I can treat you like a garbage. I'm your boss, so I can yell at you, put you down. Or whatever. I'm your parent, so I can put you down. So that's a disrespect. But speech, now I'll give you another example. Suppose you have done something bad, and I then turn around and tell this to your friend, your neighbor, and they had no need to know. Have I told the truth? Yes. But what have I actually done according to Jewish law? What's Lashon Hara? Sure, I've told the truth. Why can I be Lashon Hara? Bad, evil. The answer is because this speech did not respect the image of God of the other. It degraded the other. And there was no reason to tell this person. It's not that they were about to enter in a deal and you know he's a crook, so you want to warn them. It's that you simply wanted to degrade. So this speech, instead of bringing us closer to the world where people are treated like images of God, it's actually degraded. So it's sin. So all halakha is an attempt to show us models, both in rituals and in ethics. In ethics, I gave the example of women before. When women were chattels, the first step is to restrict their sale to marriage, and once they get married, they're treated as equals. What's the step after that? Again, why should I give you, go read a book on women in Judaism by Blue Greenberg. You can see it doesn't have one generation. It takes centuries, and the fact is it hasn't happened yet, at least not in the tradition. So that process of covenant involves the same process in business, you name it. The real, the ideal, what's the best possible approximation or a step closer, or at least an acknowledgement of the ideal? You do that, and that's the level. But of course, implicit what I'm saying is, this covenant is not finished. What is possible in my generation may be very different. The Talmud came along and said, look, the Torah restricted slavery in this way, now we restrict further. The hours, you can't work more hours than a free worker. You can't get worse food or poorer shelter than a free worker. More finally says, look, with all these restrictions, slave labor is no better. In fact, it's worse than free labor. That's the point. And that's how you abolish slavery. So the process of covenant is a never-ending process. Next slide. Well, okay, move on. Continue, sorry. We also give you a sign so you'll never forget to remind you and to remind God of the covenant. Covenant has a tremendous, I don't want to stop here because I want to get a chance for your comment. Covenant has a tremendous amount of interplay. One of them is, I gave an example. Human beings are partners, but God is a partner. That's why in Jewish tradition you can argue with God. You can arraign God for not doing what's proper, for not living up to the covenant. It's a two-way street. Next, of course, the Noahide covenant was never revoked. According to Isaiah, it continues forever. Like the waters of Noah never flood the earth, so will that meaning that all subsequent covenants, including Judaism, I believe, are built on this original covenant. And all religions, not just Judaism, are covenantal religions, potentially, if they are working for a world of Tikkun Olam and Sodom Elohim. Next. Oh, okay, no time, but there's 12 steps of covenant too. Well, one more slide. I'm not going to cover this, but if you go back and analyze all the steps of covenant, those are the steps some other time maybe. So I want to stop here, but the basic points that I want to leave you with. I believe halakha simply is codified examples in the past where reconciling the ideal and the real took the following form. And in some cases, you can literally repeat them. In other cases, you apply them by analogy to our situation. As I said before, what was possible for women's equality in the 12th century BCE or the 1st century is not to be compared with what's possible now in a much different framework and environment. So it seems to me the challenge becomes, how do you apply the principle of equality here? And to give you an example, it's not just in terms of greater equality, something again that White has been very active in, or thinking through. Does equality mean identity? Or can there be distinctive roles? Or can there be something that is distinctively a woman or man's covenantal act? And I think her instincts are correct, that probably the answer is yes, but the problem is, right now it's very hard to see that because the claim of distinctiveness is being used as a mask for inequality, so it has no credibility. But again, this is one of the issues we'll deal with as we approach the covenantal thing. So this pattern of covenant is my final comment. Covenant, not a code of law. It's not a question of the precedent. Law is one of these things that lends itself to a process of growth and gradual change. That's why law is so strong in halakha. But in the end, these laws that are meant to be concretizations of the narrative from creation to redemption through covenant. They're concretizations of the narrative. They are also living models which have to be applied in our situation and which have to be redefined when what is possible changes in order to keep the basic model going, which is that I want in some way to close the gap between the world as it is and the world that will be. My final point here is that the Jewish people have been at this for 4,000 years. It's taken tremendous commitment, steadfastness. It's taken a continuous willingness to suffer if necessary. It's taken a tremendous creativity. And of course, not least, it's a challenge each time because you do it this way, you can never do it in one generation. So the irony is that the work of all those who went before can be lost in any generation if you fail to pass it on. So the other challenge of covenant that Hadar is very much about is how do you communicate the vision, the covenant, the process, and then inspire people's desire to take it up and apply it. So the generations before me brought it this far, so that I will then take it to the next step, hopefully, till we finally get there. Thank you. Left myself all of 7 or 8 minutes, but let's go ahead. Let's see if we can get some comments or questions. Comments too are welcome. Yeah, please.
So I also want to now preface my semi-political question by saying I just commend you on feeding animals like that in Catholic bar. So the question there is, you speak very compellingly about the need to recognize a different reality in how we resolve in terms of God, in terms of women. So my question though is, should we not also recognize this reality that again is the necessity to eat, whereas today it's basically choice presented in the
It's a very important question, and I'd add to that 2 more points which Jonathan Safran-Foer makes too. One is the growth of the world population is so vast that in order to create enough meat, you have industrial farming, industrial, killing of animals, etc., which inflicts tremendous amount of additional pain and suffering on animal life as a disrespect for their life. The second point being, of course, also, and he also makes this point, that meat has a disproportionately negative impact on the environment, which is being stressed now. So these are strong reasons to reawaken the question or renegotiate it. And I would say, personally, I do believe that if not full vegetarianism, some steps toward vegetarianism, I think are very much in order if one accepts the logic of what I'm saying here. Having said that, I only want to make one counterpoint, which is I do want to acknowledge that industrial farming, which I think is overdone, has made possible an extraordinary explosion in the productivity, which has fed billions of people otherwise who might have starved. So I acknowledge that it's made a real contribution. You could maybe argue, well, the animal's suffering, but the higher life human has come out ahead. My answer is I'll accept that argument as some truth, but now you have the obligation to go back and restrict that suffering or organic, range-free, you name it. I think those are all very serious. And of course, not to mention the agri-process business again, where, again, it's a disgrace on both levels. Not only were the animals mistreated, but the workers are mistreated. And I believe that a contemporary kashrut would very much say that's an important part of the process, an important judgment, because in all these cases, covenant means closing the gap. Yeah.
Why is all of ancient Judaism?
Sacrificing.
Yes.
Well, that's Maimonides' answer. For the moment, I'm going to hide behind Maimonides. The Talmud does say, Rav Kook also taught this, that in the Messianic age there won't be any more sacrifices except for the grain, except for the grain sacrifices. So obviously, Maimonides, for the moment, that's the best answer I can give, and I think it fits the covenantal idea that the Torah cannot tell people forms of sacrifice that are out of their range of capacity. And the truth is, it was so universally accepted and recognized that sacrifices is the only way you can treat gods properly. Maimonides feels that sacrifices, therefore, was a concession to that, except, as I said, they were restricted. You couldn't sacrifice humans. You couldn't use it in magical form as a substitute for ritual, as a substitute for ethical, and so on. So my answer is, therefore, by my logic, they will not bring sacrifices in the third temple. Now, of course, I have a personal interest in this matter. I'm a Kohen, and of course, if the temple is rebuilt, I have a lifetime job. Having said that, I have many times thought about restoring sacrifices, and I'll explain you why I'm against it. I was thinking of being a doctor when I was graduating college, but I couldn't stand the sight of blood. I would faint when I'd see blood. So I realized this is not for me. I have this fantasy, the third temple will be rebuilt. They will bring in the first sacrifice. I'm the Kohen on duty. They march out, they bring the bull, they cut the throat, and I faint. So on that score, I'm very much hoping that Rav Kook is right, that the temple will bring grain. Again, the temple, by the way, it's worth referring that to. The temple, of course, it's not really about sacrifices either, although it's turned into that. The Jewish model is you want a perfect world. But you can't create a whole perfect world, child, so how do you do it? Start with one place, start with one community, start with one country, one city, Jerusalem, one country, make that a model and spread it through the world. That's the Jewish thing. Within Jerusalem, they had this fantasy, create one amazing place. The temple was meant to be not just a place we bring sacrifices. Look at Psalm 24. Before they could go into the temple, they had to pass a test. The guard standing would say, Mi Aleh Bahar Hashem, who has the ability, the right to go onto the mountain of the Lord? Who can stand in God's holy place? And you know what the would-be worshiper had to answer? I present myself, I have clean hands, pure heart, I have no swindle going, I'm not cheating, I'm not exploiting my workers. I never swear falsely. So okay, go in. That was, in effect, we were trying to create an ideal place. In the Beis HaMikdash, paradoxically, there was animal death, there was never human death, because our dream is a world of complete life. So it was meant to be a model, and of course, you know what happened. It was turned into a business, and the Kohanim were abusive, and that's the point. And people did bring sacrifices, think they can pay off God and not be ethical. So that's the problem. But the ideal really was the other, to create a model place and then spread it. And that's what the Jewish people's vision is to this day. If we can be an example of a small community that treats everybody like the image of God, that if you're hungry, I will feed you, that I will spend any amount of money to save your life, and then you extend it to your 10th cousin and your 100th cousin, and that's the way the world can be made for. Yes, sir.
Change over generations and the obligation to make the world better today than man changed today. How do you negotiate that kind of thing?
Well, of course, that's an excellent point, and it's really, unfortunately, when modernity came into the Jewish community, it was so powerful and so promising and so polarizing that the community split. And the people who were so excited, here's a chance to become equal, to join a dynamic society, to improve our affluence, to improve our dignity, to perfect the world, majority of Jews were swept into this. And not just the majority that switched from Orthodox to more liberal positions religiously. How about the groups that joined communism because they would make the world perfect, or who joined capitalism or socialism because that would make the world perfect? So it was tremendously dynamic, but it polarized, leaving behind, this is the sad part, those who said, but this tradition is not realized. You can't lose it. If you give it up, 3,000 years, 4,000 years is wasted. You haven't accomplished the goal. I'm loyal. Out of defensiveness, I believe, kind of locked in. Because if you get into a debate, you're going to lose. The other was so attractive, so you have to insist, this is God-given, I can't change. What do you mean women? Well, what do you mean Gentile? If I start that conversation, I'm going to lose. I'm going to lose my way, so I have to say no to all that. So you had a kind of a polarization. I believe now, 120 years later, we now understand that the way of all-out utopianism has its own serious weaknesses. The way of complete conservatism has its own irrelevance or weaknesses. And therefore, the real challenge is, what's the interplay of the two? And my answer is, there's no one interplay. But I think that's the constant challenge. And being faithful to the covenant involves wrestling with that challenge. And yes, so I think it legitimately, one might go further or less further in my position. One might be more radically or more traditionally. I suspect in the end it's going to be a multiple answers. But again, if human beings are unique, why should there be one solution for everybody? Nevertheless, I think that is the challenge. And how you strike the balance. The problem we know, it's like Nachman's famous line, the whole world's like a narrow bridge, right? If you go too far to the right, you fall off the bridge that way. If you go far to the left, you fall off the bridge that way. To the right, if you go, you end up, nothing can change. You uphold injustice in the name of God and tradition. What excuse could there be for agunot? We are dealing now women whose lives are being ruined by a rascal, by a wicked person, using the fact that the rabbinic tradition gave him its interpretation of full authority to right to get no one else. So in the name of trying to protect the tradition and God and Torah, you are siding with an unjust, oppressive person ruining a woman's life. You fall off that way. You go to the left, you have dropped the whole tradition. Next thing you know, you've forgotten you're Jewish. Well, how about the Jewish communists who are convinced that if we break down these traditions that separate us, we can free the world up, everybody equal, everybody perfect, and of course ended up everybody oppressed, everybody outside. So the real challenge is the interaction of the two. It's an unfinished challenge. And I think this is what studying in text and mastery is about also. It's learning to develop our own capacity. It's learning to develop a community that can do this together so we can hit a new level that works in a community. Those are some of the issues I think that we have to get out. And I'll finish with this. And I'm amazed when you think back. The covenant started, Abraham started in the Bronze Age, before the invention of iron. We are now in a post-modern, post-industrial, technological, you name it, right? Amazing amount of change, and yet the covenantal idea is still powerful, still able to attract the meaningful, still able to offer a model for the world. To me, that's a remarkable statement. But along the way, to do that, you change from prophets and priests to rabbis, a very different, totally different style. And I believe we're living through an age when you go from rabbis to lay leaders, to scholars, to generals. It's a whole range of new types of leaders, women for the first time, fully accessible to leadership. So, but to me, that's the power, again, the continuity and the transformation come hand in hand. Can we get people who are the agents of change to saturate themselves in the tradition and bring it with them? To me, that's the great teaching of the rabbis. They transformed Judaism, but they brought the whole tradition with them. And they were not arrogant as we are. Well, that's old-fashioned, that's primitive. What they said was, good, we're not going to practice this anymore, but we can learn from it, or we can study it, or we can, by analogy, apply it in a new way. So that, to me, is the opportunity, the privilege of being alive today and doing it.
Thank you, I'm going to unmic you. I'm taking your hand, but I'm also going to unmic you. Ready?
Sure. It's one of the great things. And of course, I didn't mean to say it's all one way.
No, and it could be up to them. Ultimately, it may be worthwhile.
That's what it is. That's what it is. It's a lot of responsibility. It's a lot of risk. I've noticed that. This book I'm working on actually argues that the world we're going in is transformed.